Snow drifted across the prison yard like torn paper, carried by a bitter wind that cut through coats and skin alike. In the center of the courtyard, a group of Russian prisoners stood in a ragged formation, their breath rising in thin white clouds, their hands trembling not just from cold, but from fear. They had been dragged out before sunrise, ordered to stand still, ordered to wait. No explanation. No merci. No hope. German guards watched them from the perimeter, rifles slung across their chests, boots crunching on frozen earth. Their faces were expressionless, hardened by months on the Eastern Front where compassion rarely survived the winter. The prisoners knew what such a gathering usually meant. Punishment, retaliation, execution. They had seen men disappear before. Some returned broken. Others never returned at all. The air felt heavier with every passing minute. A gate slammed open. A German major stepped into the courtyard, long coat whipping in the wind. His presence alone tightened every muscle in the prisoners' bodies. This was the man whose orders shaped their days, whose decisions had torn families apart, whose authority decided whether they starved or survived. The guards snapped to attention. The prisoners braced themselves. The major walked slowly along the line of captured Russians, his boots leaving deep prints in the snow. He paused in front of each man, studying their faces with an unreadable expression. Some prisoners lowered their eyes. Others stared ahead, resigned. A few whispered final prayers. Every instinct told them their time had come. And then the major spoke. Not a sentence of condemnation. Not a list of charges. Not the cold, familiar orders they expected. But something entirely different. Something that froze both guards and prisoners in stunned silence. It was a moment none of them would ever forget. The story began long before that frozen morning in the camp yard. To understand why a German major would gather Russian prisoners at dawn, and why he would choose a path no one expected, we must return to the shifting, brutal landscape of the Eastern Front in 1943. This was the year when winter ruled everything. Villages vanished under drifts of snow. Supply lines froze. Machines stalled. And men, whether in gray or in worn Soviet coats, learned that cold could be deadlier than bullets. The camp lay on the outskirts of a small, battered town once filled with farmers and merchants but now reduced to ruins. Half-burned timbers poked out of collapsed roofs. The main square had turned into a place where orders were shouted, prisoners were marched, and German convoys rolled endlessly forward or back. Every building carried scars of artillery. Every tree had been stripped by soldiers desperate for firewood. Inside the barbed wire fences, Russian prisoners lived through a routine shaped by exhaustion and fear. They were marched at dawn to labor sites, forced to dig trenches, move equipment, or repair roads under watchful eyes. Some were veterans from the early months of the war, captured during retreats. Others were farmers swept up when German forces advanced. A few were barely old enough to shave. Punishment was always lingering close. A missing tool, a broken cartwheel, a disagreement between guards. Any spark could ignite harsh consequences. The Russians knew this. They had seen it. By early winter, tensions had grown worse. Partisan activity increased around the town. Night raids, sabotage on supply lines, sudden explosions tearing apart German wagons. The German command blamed the prisoners, convinced they were signaling partisans or smuggling information. Evidence was thin, but suspicion was law on the Eastern Front. One evening, a bridge on the western approach was destroyed. German officers were furious. The guards swore they had seen shadows near the camp perimeter. No one identified the men clearly, but the accusation alone was enough. A group of prisoners was rounded up, questioned harshly, and locked inside a storage building under armed watch. They insisted they had been working in the yard, nowhere near the bridge. Their pleas fell on cold ears. The major arrived later that night, anger radiating off him. He had been transferred recently from another front, a man known for discipline, not leniency. The guards expected swift punishment. The prisoners expected blows or worse. Instead, he remained strangely quiet. He ordered the men separated. He asked the same questions again, this time without shouting. He demanded timelines, routes, work details. He walked the perimeter himself with a lantern, studying tracks in the snow. He stood over the ruined bridge for a long time, ignoring the cold that bit through his gloves. Something bothered him. The tracks leading away from the blast site didn't match prisoner footwear. The footprints were deeper, wider, and moved toward the forest where partisans had been hiding for weeks. And the explosive residue matched devices known to be used by guerrilla fighters, not tools the prisoners had access to. By midnight, the major realized the men in custody were innocent. But he also understood the danger. The guards were furious. The command expected retribution. And the villagers, forced into silence under occupation, watched the situation closely. A single misstep could fuel another cycle of violence. So the major made a decision. At dawn, he ordered the prisoners into the courtyard, not for execution, not for humiliation, but for something no one anticipated. Something that would alter the atmosphere of the entire camp. The courtyard grew colder as the prisoners waited, breath turning white, feet numb through torn boots, nerves stretched thin. The guards shifted restlessly, unsure why the major had ordered such a formal assembly. Punishment was expected, but the major's face revealed nothing. He stopped in front of the Russian prisoners once more. Every man braced for the announcement. The major inhaled, his breath fogging in the air, and instead of condemning them, he asked a simple question. "Who among you worked on the Western Road yesterday?" The prisoners exchanged confused glances. They expected threats, not questions. Slowly, a few hands rose, not in fear, but in truth. The major studied each face. There were no signs of guilt, only exhaustion. A guard stepped forward angrily. "Sir, we know these men helped the partisans. They were missing from their workstation." The prisoners shook their heads frantically. One tried to speak but was silenced by a guard's glare. The major raised a hand, halting the argument. "No one speaks except on my command." The courtyard stilled. He ordered the guards to bring the tool logs, work rosters, and the snow-clearing assignments from the previous day. Paperwork was rare here. Discipline relied more on suspicion than records. But the major demanded them anyway. Guards hurried off, muttering their frustration. The prisoners watched in disbelief. A German officer was verifying information? When the documents arrived, the major read them carefully. His eyes moved between the pages and the prisoners repeatedly. After several minutes, he spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. These men were not near the bridge when it was destroyed. A murmur rippled across the courtyard. The guards stiffened. One spat in the snow. Another whispered, "The major is going soft." But the major continued. Tracks at the site showed two men wearing heavy partisan boots. The angle of the blast and type of explosive are consistent with their tactics, not the tools available in this camp. The Russian prisoners looked up, stunned. Someone believed them. Someone had actually checked. But disbelief quickly turned to panic when one guard stepped forward, furious. "Sir, if we don't punish them, command will think we're protecting the enemy. The partisans will think we're weak. The men will lose discipline. This camp will fall apart." This was the escalation the major expected. Tension cracked through the courtyard like ice under pressure. Guards tightened grips on rifles. Prisoners shrank back instinctively, knowing a wrong move could ignite chaos. The major stepped toward the angry guard until they were only inches apart. His voice low but sharp. "We do not kill innocent men to reassure ourselves." The guard clenched his jaw but remained silent. The prisoners watched, breathless. The balance of power was shifting, not completely, but enough to change their fate. Then the major did something even more shocking. He ordered the prisoners to step out of formation. Guards flinched, expecting an escape attempt. But the major calmly waved them down. He led the prisoners toward a long shed on the northern side of the yard, a building they had never been allowed near. Guards followed cautiously, hands on weapons. Inside, stacked in corners, were frozen sacks of potatoes, broken tools, splintered boards, and scattered debris. The roof had partially collapsed from snow weight, leaving half the structure unusable. The major pointed at the mess. "This is what you will work on today." The prisoners stared, confused. Why show them this? Why gather them at dawn just to assign repair work? Then the major's real intention became clear. "You will repair this supply shed. That is your punishment, not for sabotage, but for being held responsible by mistake. You will clear it, rebuild it, and reinforce it. When you finish, you will receive extra rations." The guards froze. Extra rations? For prisoners accused of aiding partisans? The courtyard erupted in murmurs. Some guards protested. Some prisoners blinked in disbelief. Others felt tears sting their eyes, not from sentiment, but from sheer shock. The major silenced everyone. "This camp will not run on anger or assumptions. It will run on order. These men will work, and they will live. End of discussion." His voice carried a finality few dared challenge. The escalation reached its peak, a German major openly rejecting vengeance on the Eastern Front, choosing discipline over brutality, structure over chaos. No one expected what happened next. The wind howled against the camp walls as the major's words settled like a shockwave. Guards exchanged uncertain glances. Russian prisoners stood frozen, unsure whether they had just been spared or assigned a task that hid some cruel trick. In a place where punishment usually came swiftly and without explanation, the major's decision disrupted everything: routine, expectation, morale. But the real turning point was still ahead. The major ordered the guards to escort the prisoners to the shed. Some obeyed reluctantly, others with visible irritation. Discipline demanded compliance, but resentment simmered under the surface. The Eastern Front had hardened men into iron, and iron resisted change. Inside the shed, the prisoners surveyed the wreckage. Broken beams leaned dangerously. Snow seeped through cracked boards. Rats scattered into shadows. The place looked more like a graveyard of abandoned supplies than something worth restoring. The major entered behind them, ignoring the cold, ignoring the tension. "You will rebuild this from the ground up," he said simply. No threat, no anger, just a clear order. A prisoner cautiously raised a hand, a gesture unheard of in this camp. The guards bristled, ready to strike, but the major nodded. Why do we repair this?" the prisoner asked quietly, struggling with the language. The major replied with equal calm. "Because winter will destroy what remains of this camp if we do nothing. And because men who work with purpose survive longer than men waiting for death." The words stunned both sides. Guards looked at each other, uncertain how to interpret such reasoning. Prisoners exchanged whispers, a mixture of disbelief and relief. The major stepped aside and turned to the guards. "You will supervise, not torment. You will maintain order, not vent frustration. If any man falls behind, inform me directly." This pushed the guards to their breaking point. One stepped forward, voice shaking. "Sir, these are the enemy. We lose men every week to their partisans. How can you reward them for sabotage they might still be hiding?" It was the challenge the major expected, the moment where discipline either snapped or solidified. He walked toward the guard slowly. "You want punishment?" His voice sharpened. "Then punish the right people. Punish the partisans who hide in forests, not prisoners who have done nothing." The guard hesitated, anger fading into uneasy silence. The major continued, louder now so all could hear. "Order does not come from fear. It comes from control. A camp ruled by rage collapses. A camp run by discipline survives." The prisoners absorbed every word. This was not mercy. This was structure, fairness, even if delivered by the enemy's hand. The major wasn't choosing kindness over cruelty. He was choosing stability over chaos, a stability both sides desperately needed. Then came the moment no one expected. The major removed his gloves, took a broken shovel from the ground, and struck the frozen earth himself. A German major. Working? Guards stared in disbelief. Prisoners gasped openly. Hierarchy shattered. He lifted the shovel again, breaking ice, clearing debris, showing with action what discipline meant. "This," he said firmly, "is how a camp rebuilds." A Russian prisoner stepped forward hesitantly and picked up another tool. A guard flinched, expecting a blow, but instead, the prisoner began clearing rubble beside the major. Then another joined. Then another. The guards, still in shock, slowly relaxed as they realized nothing was collapsing. No uprising, no protest, no sabotage. What formed instead was something unheard of on the Eastern Front. A moment where both sides worked in the same bitter cold, for the same immediate purpose: survival. By midday, the shed's broken beams were sorted. The roof supports were cleared. Boards were stacked for reinforcement. The major walked out of the shed with snow on his coat and frost on his eyelashes. The guards looked at him with newfound, uneasy respect. The prisoners looked at him with something more complicated, not gratitude, but the first fragile thread of trust. The day that began with fear had transformed into something else entirely. By evening, the sky above the camp shifted from pale gray to deep blue, the kind that swallowed the last traces of daylight. The shed, once a collapsing skeleton of rotted wood, now stood reinforced, cleared, and stable. It wasn't complete, not yet, but it no longer looked like a ruin. It looked like something built by men who wanted to live through another winter. The Russian prisoners gathered near the entrance, breathing heavily, their faces red from the cold and effort. They were exhausted beyond measure, but alive. More alive, in fact, than they had felt since their capture. Their hands were numb from lifting beams and shoveling ice, but their minds carried a strange, unfamiliar lightness. For the first time in months, the rhythm of the day hadn't been shaped by fear alone. The guards watched them in uneasy silence. The major's decision had thrown the camp's balance into unfamiliar territory. Some guards still resented it, others quietly understood. Not all battles were fought with bullets. Some were fought with control, judgment, and a careful understanding of what could break morale, and what could hold it together. As the prisoners prepared to return to their barracks, the major arrived with several small sacks. He set them on the ground and stepped back. Inside were extra rations, small, but real. Bread. A few pieces of dried fruit. A ladle of warm soup for each man. A collective hush spread through the prisoners. Extra food meant life. It meant strength. It meant surviving the next frost. A guard whispered, "Sir, command will question this." The major answered without hesitation. "They will see a repaired supply shed. They will see order restored. That is enough." The truth hung unspoken. Command didn't need to know every detail. Results mattered more than rituals. One of the Russian prisoners stepped forward. His voice was hoarse, roughened by cold and months of silence. Why help us?" he asked, struggling to form the words. The major looked at him for a long moment. "This front is dying," he said quietly. "Men are dying. Discipline is the only thing left that keeps us from becoming animals. You were blamed wrongly. Correction, not cruelty, is the proper response. It wasn't kindness. It wasn't sentiment. It was a choice born from clarity, a rare commodity on the Eastern Front." As night settled, the prisoners carried their rations back through the snow. Guards followed, quieter than usual. The camp felt different now. Still harsh, still cold, still dangerous, but touched by a shift that couldn't be undone. The shed stood under the dim lanterns, a testament to a morning that had nearly ended in violence but instead turned toward survival. And in that frozen silence, one truth lingered. Sometimes, in the bleakest corners of war, the smallest act of restraint could echo louder than any act of brutality.